When I got home that Friday, something felt off. It was hard to put into words, but the house had this strange emptiness. Not that it was quiet, the usual sounds were there: the hum of the fridge, the faint rustle of leaves from the backyard through the open window, the creak of the floors beneath my steps. Yet somehow it felt as though the place was missing something. Or maybe someone. Jess wasn't downstairs, which was unusual. I'd told her I'd be home early tonight, skipping the late meeting at work just so we could have the evening together. With both of us getting busier over the last few months, our schedules didn't line up as easily as they used to, so I'd thought she'd be here, maybe sitting on the couch or reading a book. But the living room was empty, and the silence felt like it was hanging in the air a little too heavily. I set my bag down by the door and looked around, waiting to hear her footsteps or her usual, "Hey, babe," as she walked into the room. Nothing. It didn't feel right, but I brushed it off as just one of those moments where you feel strange for no reason. I checked the kitchen, thinking she might be getting a start on dinner, but it was empty too. Even the pots and pans were stacked neatly, untouched. The house had this tidy, almost sterile feel, like it had been abandoned minutes before I walked in. I pulled out my phone to text her, but just as I started typing, I heard faint voices coming from upstairs. My eyebrows furrowed. It wasn't Jess's voice, or if it was, it sounded softer, different. A low murmur drifted down, the kind of quiet talking you do if you didn't want anyone else to hear. Curiosity, or maybe some instinct I didn't fully understand, made me take a step toward the stairs. The voice was too faint to make out any words, but it felt wrong, too familiar and too intimate. I climbed the steps slowly, careful not to make a sound, feeling a strange, creeping dread with every step. When I reached the top of the stairs, I realized it was coming from our bedroom. The door was closed but not latched completely. Through the narrow crack, I could see the edge of the bed and a sliver of the room. As I approached, my heart hammered so loudly I could feel it in my ears, each beat heavier than the last. The voices were clearer now. Her laugh, a murmur, a voice that wasn't mine speaking softly. It was Jess, and she wasn't alone. My mouth went dry as I realized what was happening, but I couldn't pull myself away. I pushed the door open just enough to see them. They were sitting on the bed, close together. The guy was leaning in, talking quietly to her, his hand resting on her shoulder as if it had always belonged there. Jess was smiling, laughing softly, and looking at him in a way I hadn't seen in a long time. It felt like watching a scene from someone else's life, like some stranger had taken over my place in her eyes, and I just stood there, frozen, unable to look away. I backed away from the door, my mind racing with a mess of emotions: confusion, anger, heartbreak, disbelief. The hallway suddenly felt too narrow, the walls too close, pressing in on me. I took a deep breath, leaning against the wall, just outside our bedroom. What was I supposed to do? Storm in there, confront them? What would I even say? After a few seconds, I moved downstairs, trying to process what I'd just seen. I felt like a stranger in my own home. The laughter, the easy conversation. It felt like I'd wandered into someone else's life, one where I was nothing more than a shadow, lurking around in the background. I didn't know how long they'd been meeting like this, or how long Jess had kept this side of her life hidden from me. I sat on the couch, staring at nothing in particular, my mind racing. Moments from our relationship flashed through my head. Our first date, the late night talks, the promises we made. Somewhere along the way, all that had shifted, slipping through my fingers like sand. How long had she been spending her time with him instead of me? After what felt like forever, I heard the faint sound of footsteps upstairs. The voices quieted, and a door creaked open. I tensed up, heart pounding again, as I heard Jess say something in a hushed tone, laughter punctuating her words. Footsteps followed, and the quiet murmur of their conversation grew louder as they came down the stairs. Instinctively, I got up and moved toward the kitchen, positioning myself out of view from the stairs. I heard them reach the bottom, and then they lingered near the door, still lost in their conversation. It was almost surreal to hear them talk so casually in the house I'd built my life around, as if I wasn't part of the equation at all. Eventually, I heard the front door open. There was a pause, the kind you'd expect in a movie, where two people look at each other with some unspoken connection. Then a soft goodbye, and the door clicked shut. Jess didn't come back in right away. I could hear her standing outside, maybe watching him leave, maybe gathering her thoughts. My mind raced with a dozen questions I didn't even know how to ask. When she finally walked back inside, I stood in the kitchen, waiting. I wasn't sure what I was going to say. I wasn't even sure if I was ready for her to see me. But before I could overthink it, Jess turned the corner, stopping dead in her tracks when she saw me. "Hey," she said, her voice catching a little. She looked startled, like she hadn't expected anyone to be home. "Hey," I replied, keeping my tone steady even though my insides were anything but calm. I could see the flicker of guilt in her eyes, the subtle shift as she tried to gauge how much I might have seen or heard. For a moment there was silence, thick and heavy, stretching between us. "Didn't know you'd be home so early," she said, attempting a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. I took a deep breath, my eyes never leaving hers. "I got off a bit early. Thought it'd be nice to surprise you." The words came out with a hint of bitterness, and I could see her flinch just a little. "Oh, that's nice." Her voice wavered. She glanced down, fiddling with the strap of her purse, unable to meet my gaze. The guilt was evident now, uh, written all over her face. And I couldn't help but wonder how many times she'd been in this same position before, hiding her secrets behind a practiced smile. We stood there, locked in a silent standoff, each of us waiting for the other to speak first. Jess finally looked up, her face a mixture of guilt, fear, and a faint hint of defiance that caught me off guard. It was like she was bracing herself, preparing for what would come next. "So," I said, crossing my arms, trying to keep my voice steady despite the shaking inside. "Are you going to tell me what's going on, or do I have to spell it out?" Her expression shifted, and for a split second, I saw something like relief, as if she'd known this moment was inevitable. She glanced away, took a shaky breath, and then finally met my eyes. I I don't know what to say, Matt," she began softly, her voice almost lost in the quiet of the room. "I never wanted it to come to this. I didn't want to hurt you." "Didn't want to hurt me?" I repeated, hardly able to believe what I was hearing. "Jess, I saw you with him. I'm standing here, staring at you, and you're telling me this?" She swallowed, her eyes glistening with tears. "I'm sorry," she said, though the words felt thin, like they were meant more to soothe her than to actually reach me. "I didn't mean for it to get this far. I felt so disconnected, Matt. Like we were miles apart, and he was there." "That's all it took?" I asked, my voice full of disbelief and anger. "A little distance, and suddenly everything we built together doesn't mean a thing?" She looked down, her expression conflicted. "It's not that simple," she murmured, almost as if speaking to herself. "Things haven't been the same between us for a long time. I'm not saying it's your fault or mine, but it happened." I shook my head, feeling a painful knot in my chest. "No, Jess, things like this don't just happen. You make choices. You chose to let this happen. You chose to break what we had." She met my gaze, and this time a flicker of frustration sparked in her eyes. "And what about you, Matt? You think you've done everything right? You think I just woke up one day and decided to throw everything away? We've been drifting for months, maybe years, and you barely noticed." Her words landed hard, but I forced myself to keep my voice steady. "I'm not claiming I was perfect, Jess. I know we've had our issues, but there's a big difference between working through problems and stepping out with someone else." The room fell silent, the tension hanging thickly around us. I wanted to yell, to demand explanations, to make sense of everything, even though I knew it wouldn't change anything. Somewhere along the line, things had gone wrong, and now we were left standing in the broken pieces. "Matt," she said, her voice barely holding together, "I'm sorry. I never wanted you to find out this way. I didn't want this for us." Her apology was soft, maybe even sincere, but it felt like a weak attempt to patch over the mess. "So what now?" I asked quietly. "You say you're sorry and we just pretend like it never happened?" She shook her head slowly, looking down at her hands. "I don't know. I don't even know if we can move past this, or if we should." The weight of her words hit me hard, and suddenly the reality of our unraveling marriage felt inescapable. All the years together, the memories, the dreams we'd shared, they felt like they were slipping away, replaced by this painful truth. I wanted to say something, to confront her with my anger and hurt, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, I stood there, watching her as the silence grew heavier between us, like an invisible wall that couldn't be torn down.